Well, good morning, good afternoon. It's great to be here with you in our live Liberty Alert here in Washington, D.C., and that's where we are. I hope you're doing well amidst, again, all this COVID-19 stuff and the crisis stuff. This is a new time just for today, and I just wanted to make sure that you understood this was just a one-time thing. We'll see how it goes. Thanks for hanging in there with us with this kind of stuff. But we double booked ourselves, and I still don't really understand how to. I don't want to tape it and put it up live. So again, that's kind of what we're doing today. We talked last week about secular pietism, identity politics, the gathering storm. The question now for us is, well, what should the church do? I mean, can we still do ministry in the middle of all this? And the answer today is yes, we can. I mean, obviously we can do ministry. In fact, we were meant to be in the middle of these kinds of issues, in the middle of these kinds of challenges. So, again, the challenges and the opportunities of the church, the urban centers, what's unique about urban ministry, we're going to talk about that today. What does politics have to do with this? How are we to engage in this stuff without politicizing the gospel? And honestly, the Lutheran Church has a way of doing this that I think other churches, if we would just learn how to practice it ourselves, it's a real blessing. We can engage these moral issues of the day for the sake of the community and also for the sake of the mission of the church. And what does the morality of the Bible have to do with all this? And I think right now the culture needs to hear that as well as the good news of the gospel more than ever. Thanks for continuing to share our Liberty Alerts, and again, for those of you who weren't able to be with us in the live portion, again, you can always see it. The tape version is on our website, the lcrlfreedom.org. You can go see all of the Liberty Alerts there. They're all loaded up in the video section as well. And please keep sharing our website with others, the lcrlfreedom.org. Please share that with others. And we need to continue to build a community that's talking about these things. Gosh, I know 50,000 is not a big deal for all the millions that people have out there today, but if we had 50 or 100,000 people kind of coming and using our information for the sake of the mission and the ministry of the church, it would be a real blessing, especially when I see the congressmen and the senators, and I say I represent 2.2 million people in our church and 6,000 schools and all the teachers and pastors and people. And then also, we've got several 100,000 people, listening to our podcasts or our Liberty Alerts and those kind of things. So put this information to work. It really is. We're trying to do this and get this information out for you. Today, then, some thoughts about ministry in the midst of all of this, especially in the city. A short weekend review, because we always do like to keep up with what's going on in the world out there. And one of the things, I've got a good book that I think can maybe help you with the politics of all the stuff that's going out there today. There's a book called Beyond Good Intentions, A Biblical View of Politics by Doug Bandow. Now, it's not written from a Lutheran perspective. Martin Alasky, I like a lot of what he writes. A lot of great information in here, and I generally agree with almost everything in here. And he also has a magazine called World, and I think it's a kind of a healthy look at what's going on and how Christians need to learn how to engage these kinds of things. But I'm getting to the point where this is what's starting to bug me. One group of people is judged by their intentions, and the other group of people is judged by their actions. No, in politics, don't listen so much to what they're saying. Watch what they do. And I think that, and watch what happens by what they do. And so a lot of times people say, well, I know that was bad policy. I know it destroyed the urban family, but it was done with the best of intentions. That's the problem. It was bad policy. And it had a bad outcome, and we need to change that kind of stuff. So that's the point when we talk about these intentions. Judge politics by its intent, not by its intentions, but by its actions. And so, as I said before, we tend to look at things that empower individuals, empower neighborhoods, empower families, and then protect the church and its religious liberty to be the church. That's what I look for in politics and policy. I don't look for them to solve the issues, because the minute the politicians try to solve the issues, they tend to make themselves the ones that you need to depend on. Once you have to depend on them, you don't depend on yourself or on your faith or on your community, on your family. Usually that's when bad things happen. And so, again, beyond good intentions, no, let's actually judge things by the actions and the results, not so much by the intentions. And I think we'll have a lot better politics as well. And in that regard, then, a couple of things that are happening right now that just are driving me crazy. You know, they're gutting police forces all across the country, and what is happening? Crime is rising. Violent crime is on the rise. Bad people know that they're not going to be stopped now. And therefore, more black people are under siege, more black people are getting killed, and more people in general. But the point is, that's exactly the opposite of what we said our intentions were. And so again, so Austin guts the police budget to, and then here's the other thing, to do what with that money? To fund abortions. We should be voting these people out of office. Not only they're making Austin a less safe place to be, and by the way, we've talked about how I have no problem limiting the police's involvement in our lives. We've talked about this, so I don't want to hear that we're just pro-police and we don't really care. No, we said if there's nothing wrong with limiting police or limiting coercive government in our lives, but then if that happens, then we have to replace that with virtuous living and virtuous and strong families and things like that. You can't destroy the family, which is what the policies are doing in the city, and you can't destroy the police and then expect civility and peace and justice to happen. It's going to go the exact opposite way. That's what's happening. And then what did these people do with the money? So for those of you who believe that Black Lives Matter Inc. Is a good thing, and we're just being too critical. No, they're seeking to devour the family, to delegitimate the family, and they don't have any problem with things like abortion clinics in cities. And so they took police money and they gave it to the abortion clinics. And I thought it drove me crazy to think, yeah, we're going to keep liquor stores and we're going to keep Planned Parenthood butcher shops in the poor neighborhoods so that they can thrive. Right. Judge by the actions of the policy. And then that goes to the other thing that is just, the murder of this boy, Cannon Hinant. And I've seen some people say, we shouldn't be making a national issue of this. As if somehow the murder of a 5-year-old just because. Now, the reason why it's a big deal to me is because the Black Lives Matter Inc. guy is calling for the destabilization of all of our culture. And he's calling for he's even said white children, I think it was he who said white children, they need to be scared in their beds and they need to be as afraid, et cetera, et cetera. And so those of us who said when we're in urban ministry, we can't stand that black kids are getting killed by stray bullets from gang violence. We can't stand that children are in the middle of this kind of violent display. But the question is how to solve it. And we're not hearing anything about empower families, educational choice, give neighborhoods back to the families. We're not hearing any of that discussion. All we're hearing about is defund the police and actually empower Planned Parenthood. And then we have a situation where people listening to the leader of some of this stuff, one guy, what did he do? He put his knee on the neck of a toddler. Older folks are being beaten to a pulp in our cities. And then this kid, 5-year-old kid, guy walks out and shoots him in broad daylight. We keep hearing how, dog whistle so that violence ensues. This isn't a dog whistle. This is a clear, hey, go ahead and do it. And it's starting to happen. And we're going, civilized people, black, white, all races, no, this is not, we don't want to live this way. And we're going to take back our neighborhoods. And so the politics that we espouse, if you want to talk about that, are politics that empower the neighborhood. They empower the families. They give choice and try to give equal access to all people so that they can take care of their own life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that kind of stuff. And when we see there's a violation of that, which happened in the George Floyd situation, we rise to that occasion and say that's wrong. But it flows from our natural understanding of all lives matter, and in this case, that life was treated in a way it should never have been treated. And if we see that happening to folks like that in general, then know that we have to deal with that. But we have to deal with this too. And BLM Inc. is not about that. So those who want to start differentiating your support for some of these things. I think you need to look at what's going on with the police force, violent crime, more lives are being lost, and there's no outrage to this kind of stuff. And this is very problematic for moving forward in a great way to empower our urban neighborhoods, especially our black community. So judge by the actions of the policies, not by the intentions. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And we do need to be wiser, and we need to be smarter, because our intentions are being used to actually foster things that are very destructive to the very people we claim to be helping. Today I want to talk about, well, what can the church do? And I want to talk more about the ministry now. Yes, we're going to talk about the politics of some of this stuff so we can engage it, but for the sake of the ministry. And so this is a step back in time a little bit for me, because it's more what I was doing as a pastor in the urban communities when I was younger and when I was not doing something like I'm doing here in Washington, D.C. And the questions I want to talk about today is, how can the Lutheran Church be more effective in its outreach in urban communities across the culture, across America? And what do the religious liberties have to do with this? You know, how can we put our temporal freedoms to work for the sake of our mission and ministry? Now, for those of you who don't really know me, I've been a pastor now for 32 years, and many of them have been in urban, cross-cultural situations and settings. My first call was to Dallas on the south side, not the north side of Dallas, and my next call was to Tampa. And in Tampa was Brandon. That was my most, if you want to call it, normal ministry. I think we had 1,500 members. We were 950 in worship. I think we had 350, 400 in Bible study. It got even a little higher than that for a while. And that was just 42 elders. It was a blast. I loved it. And part of what we did is we helped revive the downtown mother church of all of us while I was there. And then my foray into urban ministry completely. New York City, West Side, Hell's Kitchen, Church for All Nations, and also worked with Philip Sayrain. He was on staff with me in Life's Journey Ministries. Philip was African immigrant pastor from Liberia, my heart friend, if you will, from different parts of the world. And New York City taught me a lot about the challenges and the opportunities of urban ministry. Then I trained people out in Los Angeles, trained people for urban, about 75, 80 guys now in the ministry, been trained through the Cross Cultural Ministry Center out in Concordia, Irvine. And also I pastor churches in the Los Angeles area. Again, kudos to my good friends in LA and St. Paul, LA, and other churches in the area that I was privileged to serve. Then I went to the Lutheran Hour. And so urban ministry was kind of my life, my heart blood, and then went into radio with the Lutheran Hour, and now here in Washington, D.C. So this has always been a part of my life, and dealing with these issues now has now come to the forefront. So I'm saying, can the church actually be in the middle of this? And the answer is, of course we can. We were meant to thrive, and not just survive, but thrive in the middle of these things, because we bring the message of the good news of Jesus into the middle of the chaos. But we do need to learn how to deal with the politics, because the politics in some ways is seeking to stifle the voice of Christ and stifle the voice of the gospel in all these questions. So how can we be useful in His hands? Now, what is urban? What do I mean by urban? Well, urban to me is just, there's more of everything, okay? Multicultural, multi-ethnic, multilingual, increased density. There's just a lot more people. When I was in California, there's this guy I kept running into. He's from India. And finally I just said to him, hey, well, do you like it here in California? He says, no. I said, well, why don't you like it in California? He says, not enough people. So where he came from, there were 25 million people in his city, and he just thought there was too much wide open space in Los Angeles. So it's a matter of one's perspective, I'm sure, right? So living on top of people, the speed, the pace of life, everything seems to move faster, and then it's harder to get places. The subway, the 2-hour commutes, those kind of things. The speed of cultural change, that happens. It happens a lot faster in the city, and that it kind of unnerves us a little bit. But for those of us who are Christian, that kind of change doesn't bother us, because our constant is always our faith relationship with Christ. But I remember serving in New York. We had a whole community, a whole building, that's several thousand people in it, in that whole neighborhood. Overnight it changed because the rental laws changed. And all of the people we've been serving suddenly were gone. And we were different with a whole different clientele of people. Then there's the personal feelings of isolation, of course, racism, poverty, crime, violence, joblessness, family breakdown, education. The elephant in the room is, of course, what are the political challenges to engaging that? I'm going to talk a little bit about contextualization in a minute. You know, we all have to do that. But what are the political challenges that are to be engaged in the middle of all this today? You see, if I was to give a basic understanding of the church's view of politics, we don't think politics can save us. Remember, we're two kingdom. God is at work in the world two different ways. He preserves the world through things like state, police, moms and dads, those kind of vocational things, but he doesn't save it. So it's a secondary work, but necessary. But the elephant in the room is what's going on in politics today. We generally think of politics as that which empowers people. It empowers the individual. It protects the individual before the state, but empowers him to that end, empowers his family, empowers the neighborhood, protects the church. We think that if policies do that, and of course honor the family, and honor the authority of the family, and don't let the family be usurped by the educational system, by the police, by the family first, and everything else is derived from that. We look for those empowerment things. What I found out in urban ministry is when I tried to empower individuals, empower neighborhood, so they could buy their homes, they could raise their kids, they suddenly didn't need the aldermen as much. And that's when I got crossways with the politics. So when I look at politicians who talk empowerment but wind up actually making people more dependent on them, I'm against that. And I think generally our engagement strategies are against that. And as the church, we can actually be useful by actually empowering neighborhoods, families, communities, and there's ways we can be a useful in God's hand to that. But we're going to then run into the aldermen and to the mayor and to those kind of things because now we're taking their power away from them. If you don't believe me, then why is educational choice? Why is that not something? Why aren't the Democrats running on that right now? They say they're for the urban community, and even Republicans shy away from some of this. I don't know why, because it empowers people to take control of the education of their children so that, we're not going to fight about prayer in school. We'll just go to a school that honors prayer in school. Why do we have to fight the politics of prayer in school when if I want to go to a different school, I can? If I want a better education for my kids, I can do it because the money's there, it's for education alone, but now as a parent, I take it parental choice wherever I want. And those are the things that are being shut down by certain politicians. Why? Because they lose control of that money. They lose control of that educational system. They lose control of that. Well, I don't care about that. I care about the people I serve. So empowerment is the issue, and that's the thing we're going to run into. And it's secularism, statism, government intrusion into these areas that we're fighting against. And that's why I don't like this left-right. Whenever people talk about these issues, they say, well, the left-handed or the liberal and the conservative left-right. No, don't use that terminology, because that terminology is out there basically to marginalize the church. The church, if you believe in the Bible, you're always considered a right-wing organization. Don't care whether you're really loving, benevolent, you're always going to be over there, and by that definition, you're already dismissed as irrelevant to the discussion. It's not left-right, because to be very honest with you, Hitler wasn't a right-wing conservative Christian. He was a fascist, a right version of the statist version of life. So I look at statism versus individual liberty, statism versus individual liberty, or like we talked about last week, limited state on the bottom, limit the state, free the individual. Statism turns it upside down, puts the state on the top, and then everyone is subservient to whatever it decides. That's the political battle. And in virtually every city in our country today, it's more of a statist view of things. And that really is going to be problematic. as we engage that and try to empower our neighborhoods. Now, the LCMS typically is displaced in our culture. We're an ethnocentric church. We've never been a mainline church. In some sense, we didn't fit into the American experiment, and we've always been 30 or 40 years behind whatever's going on in culture. When modernism hit in the 20s, we didn't get hit with that until the 60s. And so while the culture was going through the racial issues, we were actually battling modernism in our midst, because we've always been a Hamlet people. If you want to know more about this, read Ethnic America by Thomas Sowell. Ethnic America by Thomas Sowell. And he talks about Germans as Hamlet people. Wherever they went, they didn't ask for anybody's help. They built their towns, they built their schools, they built their churches, they built their hospitals, they built their publishing houses. They built everything. They didn't need anybody's help. They took care of themselves. Now that is a great assimilation strategy. It's a terrible mission strategy. And so we've actually had to fight our own survival skills to be good missionaries. But it's one of the reasons why we spoke German, and we were kind of like this ethnocentric enclave in the middle of America all the way through World War II. And we were still fighting to speak German in our churches and in our schools. We're a lot like how the Mexican church is, or the Latin American churches in America. You know, they still want to speak Spanish in the home, and they want to speak Spanish in their churches and schools. And Germans were like that too. We fought for that ability. But overnight we had to come up with this idea of, are we German Americans, or are we Americans who come from a German heritage, and all those things. And overnight, World War II kind of forced us to become Americanized, if you will. But again, we learned all about the tension of being faithful to our heritage, faithful to our faith, and then also faithful to the country we now happen to live in. So how do we put that to work? That our experiences as people in this culture, good and bad, the message that we have, especially the two kingdom message that we have, how do we put all that to work for the sake of our mission in the city? Now, I'm going to post this document. It's called LCMS Two Kingdom Missional Engagement, General Congregational Motivations, Expectations, and Guiding Principles. This is the index at the end of my thesis. My thesis was a missional thesis, a PhD thesis, and it was designed to answer a question like, how can we be useful in God's hands in urban mission when black liberation theology was telling us we don't even belong there? That's basically what my 300 pages and 1,000 footnotes are all about. And at the very end, I came up with 9 things you've got to do if you're going to do urban ministry. And this is what I call contextualization. And we'll get to the uniqueness of the politics in a minute. But this is stuff you've just got to do. I'm not going to go through all of this. If you want, you can read the document. But if you want me to come and talk to your church about this stuff, this is what I used to do before I came to D.C. It was all about how to be better missionaries in the city, how to put the uniqueness of our ethnocentricity to work, for the sake of our sharing the gospel. And these are the 9 things that I came up with. The first one is very important. Establish your ears in the neighborhood. And when I talk about that's again becoming that 150% person that really is trying to get rid of some of the things that are offensive, or some of the things that get in the way of you being a neighborhood person in this neighborhood. But you can only become you're still going to be who you are. So you become 75% of what you were, 75% of what now you can be in this new neighborhood. So you become a 150% person, and people see you struggling to be authentic in the midst of the street now that you serve. It's a street sport, this contextualization. So prayer walk in the neighborhood, meeting and greeting the business folks, offering your church facilities as a place for the community to gather when there's issues in the community, hearing both sides and both cries in the neighborhood. You don't even always have to come down on either side, or even if you disagree with one side or the other, at least hear everything so that you can be a unique church voice for the sake of the community. Remember when I was dealing with the Ferguson issue, and Ferguson is my case study in my PhD thesis, people asked me at the very first day, what do you want to say about this? And I said, well, what do you want me to say? Well, is it Michael Brown? Is he right? Is the policeman right? What do you say about this? And I said, well, right now, I don't know. I don't know if the policeman did what was right or not. I don't know if Michael Brown did what was right. Then I saw the tape of kind of the how afraid that store owner was of Michael Brown, and I realized Michael Brown was a force in that neighborhood. And when he stole what he stole, that guy wouldn't even tell the police. He didn't even want his name out there because he was afraid, I think, of what was going to happen to his bodega if it got out that he may have made the phone call. All those kind of things. I was just like, I don't know. I still don't know. Okay? And I don't know if that was legitimate force. What I do know is the businesses were innocent. And I said, so, if there was anything that first day, I said, if you want a prayer walk, if you want to go support, you go stand right there and protect those folks, because those actually are the people who made that neighborhood work for the sake of everybody. But again, be the kind of person that they would go to and say, hey, we need your help. And what can we do? And they would think of you as a trusted voice. So establish that. Know the particulars of your particular neighborhood. Too much of the discussions today are about general people. I don't know what a general white person is. I don't know what a general black person is. I just know the people of my neighborhood. And I know the particulars of my neighborhood. And I think if you're going to go into the neighborhood, that's how you've got to go in. You've got to go in as one who falls in love with the neighborhood in which you live and serve. Undergird what's there, because God is at work already in neighborhoods, even just preserving them. So get to know the police stations, the police leaders, get to know the social service agencies, the hospitals, the schools, all the different things. Be a blessing to them, undergird them, find ways to pray for them, and then if there's a hole in those services, then your church can rise to that occasion. I was working here on the Hill. We were meeting at the White House with the staff there, and they were talking about foster care. And Kentucky, especially, the churches have risen to the occasion of foster care. And there are whole churches and whole networks of churches now that are becoming involved in foster care because there's so many kids who are without, homes. And it's a powerful thing. The state just can't keep up with the need, and the churches are rising to the occasion, which is why I'm so angry about the politics of trying to shut those church foster care folks down because they believe in traditional marriage. That's one of the reasons why we're battling on the Hill for religious liberty, so that churches can rise to the occasion in some of these issues in the city. And then prioritize person, family, community, then state and nation. And all that's backwards today. We're starting with nation, state, and by the time we get to family and individual, we are not even talking about the policies and politics of things. Now, again, I can't go through all of this because this is more general, and we want to get to the politics of this issue and how we can use it today. But know the uniqueness of your experience as a Lutheran church in this culture and in your neighborhood, and why. And be committed to move beyond ethnocentrism, but also be committed to put that ethnocentric, we take care of ourselves, put that to work for the sake of others. We actually had an English synod, which meant that we said, we don't know how to talk to these English people. And we actually tried to, that's one of the ways we addressed our kind of not fitting in here as a very small voice in the middle of all this. Let's put that kind of wisdom to work of branching out in ways that allow us to be who we are, but who we are in service, in God's name, in service to our neighbor. So again, there's a whole bunch of these things that I wanted. If you want to talk more about this, I'll leave it on there, but establish your ears in the neighborhood, know the particulars of the neighborhood, honor the structures of God's left-hand work in the neighborhood, know the uniqueness of the American Lutheran experience, be committed to moving beyond one's ethnocentrism, but put it to work, seek what the church and the community have in common, be prepared. Now here's the one we'll talk a little bit more in a minute. Be prepared for the public caricature and resentment and almost delegitimation. They already know who you are and they don't want you in the neighborhood. You're going to have to get past that. And that's part of what I have in here. Accept the tension of God's two-kingdom work. Some of this political stuff is necessary. It's a necessary evil sometimes. Has to be done. But it's not the ultimate work of God, and we've got to be part of both of those. And then remember, finally, the ultimate purpose of all of this community engagement is to preach and teach the gospel. So in all things, a dynamic two-kingdom engagement is anything but static, even though it might not always be policy driven. So this document will be up on the website after we're done. And if you want to have like a weekend, a missional weekend, you can get a hold of us through our webpage or gregory.seltz at lcrlfreedom.org. All right, so today, just the political milieu of the city especially is that it's dangerous, if you will, to be a confessing biblical Christian today. You know this. People are scared to even share their views on some of these things. I've given you that book, It's Dangerous to Believe, by Mary Eberstadt. And she said it's a profound thing and a still unfolding transvaluation that yesterday's sinners have become the new secular saints, and yesterday's sins has become virtuous, a positive expression of freedom. And the politics in the city is more punitive in that regard today than ever. So what I'm saying is, the church, come on, we can be a contrasting voice. Maybe we now are just countercultural just because that's where we are now. But we need to learn to be that voice then for the sake of the community in which we serve. So we are a contrasting voice now, and it's easier to be that because the culture in some ways has shifted to a secularism, especially in the city. Now, again, this is not my opinion. This is the sociological data. If you want to read this, James Davison Hunter's got a great book called Culture Wars and then To Change the World. Those two books lay it all out. And he talks about the politicization of everything now in a lot of places. And he says there's one view that's taken over most of our urban centers. It's the secular progressive view. It's taken over our university system. It's taken over our school system. It's virtually the only view you can have in those places. And most of you know this intuitively, but it's also demonstrably true. And unfortunately, what that means is then only one view is allowed in the discussion, and it's very hard to actually engage this stuff when there's kind of a winner-take-allness now to virtually everything we're talking about. So what was once a dialogue is now a battle, and we didn't create that notion. It's not a dialogue, but a delegitimation move of the other side of the conversation. It's not a live and let live kind of thing anymore like it used to be, but an acquiesce or be silent kind of thing. And so in Culture Wars, he defines it that way, and he says, basically what we have is you're engaging structures now that are rooted in the urban centers. He said the secular progressivism is rooted in the urban structures of the Northeast, the Midwest, and the coast. He said its impulse it is secular progressive, and it literally dominates the culture defining things like media, education, and politics in our culture today. Now, I've quoted Robert Reich to you. I'm not going to quote that again, but he talks about how we're considered anti-modernist. And that's kind of where we are today. The church is defined politically over here and irrelevant. And God doesn't allow us to stay where the culture defines us to be. God says, get back in there and be my people for the sake of others. So, unfortunately, this idea that we're anti-modernists or that we're conservatives who really don't belong here, that kind of stuff, that's been weaponized. And that's what's going on in the big issues of like abortion, gay marriage, sexual orientation. Those are the weapons, those are the hammers now that are being used politically to start to stifle and silence the church in its voice in the community. And our voice is needed now in those communities more than ever. When I say our voice, God's voice, the moral voice of the Scripture, the gospel voice of the Scripture. And we may not be the best practitioners of it. We may be the broken healers bringing it. We may be those who are struggling just like everybody else is struggling. But we know that message is powerful. We know it, and we know that person, Jesus, is powerful. We know God the Father preserves through His law. We know it. So we want to bring that back where we see the kind of chaos unraveling again. And so we engage for the sake of the culture. So how do we do that? We engage because Christ engages the same way, out of love, but we're speaking His truth in love. And we engage as God engages it, to preserve and to save. And that's why we try to fight for the right to be a public voice without politicizing the gospel. Remember last week we talked about how we need to contend. We need to actually fight for this. And so if we see a certain movement that's making the Supreme Court kind of an anti-religious liberty court, where they're actually going to make the court more of a legislative body, which it's not supposed to be, and that First Amendment was supposed to be an enduring amendment because it's fundamental, we need to vote to protect religious liberty for us and for all people. What we don't want is 9 people deciding what that now means as if it doesn't protect us at all. And so again, fighting for religious liberty, the right of conscience, merely allows us to continue to be a public voice in the culture. And so we want to continue to do that, and we want to explain to people how exercising our rights of conscience, why that's such a powerful thing for the sake of the culture in which we live. And so we've talked about God's 2 ways of doing that, dynamic differentiation, how God engages through vocation, through family, through police, through even politics and all those things, but just to preserve His world so that the world can be saved through the preaching and teaching of the gospel freely for all people. So we want to talk that and still engage the world for that sake. So the question I have is, can there be like a left-hand mission? Right-hand mission is, God is at work through His church to preach and teach the gospel. But what about this moral stuff? If we engage this, is that part of our mission work? Yes, it is. Because it matters whether the culture believes that there is a God in heaven who creates and sustains the world. It's actually fundamental to our dignity that's written in our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence. So the idea of God, and it's His world and He orders it, is worth defending even for the sake of those who don't believe it. And that's the first way we engage the world as God's people for the sake of the culture in which we live. Moms and dads were that first wave of teaching people values and virtues and moral and teachings and these things. And then Dr. Spock came and almost devalued parenting and devalued discipline and almost made children the rulers of the home. Well, now you see what that means when you have people who've never been disciplined before. I think a lot of this Antifa stuff is people who have never been disciplined, who've never been told no, and now they're deciding we are going to tear everything down and you can't stop us. Well, no. Moms and dads used to say, son, I'm going to stop you right here because we don't do things that way. So dignity, culture, God, the Creator who gives us unalienable rights, yes. And then the second thing that we can contend for, because I think our liberties depend on it, is the teaching that human beings are depraved and naturally, and now it was not born into us in the sense that God didn't create sin in us, but it's now become so inherent in us, it's almost like it's a complete part of us. But we're sinful, depraved people through and through, 100%. And that's why the Founding Fathers had a tripartite government that thwarted anybody getting a hold of absolute power because they thought we're sinful, we're depraved, we would always do the wrong thing with it. That's incredible wisdom. Protecting us from the mob, which we see now kind of running amok, and protecting us from the tyranny of one who takes over everything. And right now, there are people who want to take over everything who are letting the mob violence do its work so that people give their liberties up to those who are in charge. We should say no to all of that, okay? We contend for this. Why? To preach and teach the whole counsel of God. So if we're going to get back involved in these issues in the city as a church, there's a couple of things. I think that the most basic fight is fight for religious liberty so you can be the church in the neighborhood without coercion, without fear. So that you're not going to be harassed by the mayor who's going to send police to shut you down because you somehow don't honor what edict she says has to be done. That's what happened in Chicago. Or when they say you can't worship, we're saying, wait a minute, we're the ones who determine whether we can worship and not because it's a First Amendment protected constitutional right. Now, we can be willing to give up that for a time for this reason, but you don't come in and tell us you're not going to do it because I said so. And I think that's the proper way to deal with a lot of these issues about worship, wearing masks, all these different kinds of things. So the most basic fight is for religious liberty and the responsibility of being a healthy voice. And what Richard John Newhouse says, he said, right now the culture, the statists are trying to control all the institutions of the culture, including the church. And so they don't care whether you have individual personal liberty to be the church and to have a faith, because you're no threat. But if there's an institution called the church that can stand against the abuses of the state, that's what these statists want to take control of. And they're doing it through various things, whether it's overreaching health insurance to the point where it starts to tell the church what it will preach and teach if it wants to take care of its workers, or whether it's these SOGI laws, if you teach anything about this transgenderism or that, if you don't teach what the state tells you to teach, we can shut your schools down. Or whether it's gay marriage, if you don't honor the teaching of gay marriage, then we won't let you have these mission ministries of foster care or adoption agencies. We have to say no to that. And so fight for religious liberty to be a servant in the neighborhood. The most basic issue, number 2, that I think intersects with the urban community and the church is the family. One place we can really be a blessing is to talk about why mom, dad, child is so important, and how we can undergird that, and we can support that, and we can teach that. And prayerfully, I wish we would model it better. I mean, we can't be a church of divorce. We can't be a church of broken relationships and then go and say, well, here's this thing called the family. We need to strive to keep our families together too. But again, it's one of the most basic things, and then maintaining the overarching authority of the family with regards to its children. That's something we need to do. And then finally, the most basic intersecting blessing that I think that we have as a church that can be useful in urban ministry is our school system. And right now our schools are being pushed into the suburbs, and there's a whole reason for that. We're being kind of priced out of the marketplace in the urban areas, and therefore there's only one view that's being taught about what it means to be human, what it means to be free, what it means to be a citizen. All that is coming from a secular progressive worldview, and I think we need to compete with that. And our schools can do that. And so again, fighting for the right to be there. And I'm talking about avoiding the politics of there. Go to the people and just say, wouldn't you rather have several schools in your neighborhood? Well, parental choice, that's the way to start to make sure that there's enough provision so that these schools can be there and bless you. And then you can have schools that honor the biblical understanding of what it means to be human, that honor that all are created equal, that honor that all have equal access to these things, and we can fight for those things together, that honor God's view of humanity for the sake of the world in which we live and for the sake of those we love. And so again, I think if you want to talk about the policy fight there, I think that's why educational choice is so important. It would allow us to go back into these city enclaves in a way that could bless the neighborhood. And then finally, if you're going to talk about urban stuff, the politics and mission, the goal of the church is to empower the neighborhood. Ultimately, we want to empower them with faith in Jesus Christ, which means that their eternal lives are secure in His name. Their identity is in Christ, not in anything in this world. Not in their struggles, not in their accomplishments, because all those things will fade away, but in Christ, the enduring relationship we have with each other, because Christ is our common Savior. But we can even in these left-hand kingdom issues talk about empowering the neighborhood. And that's what I learned in my urban work, is that as you start to empower individuals, you start to empower neighborhoods. Neighborhoods were taking back. In New York, there was a neighborhood that decided they were going to clean up the neighborhood. They were going to get rid of the junkies, and they were going to get rid of the urban blight and all the things. And a lot of it was stuff coming into their neighborhoods from New Jersey or from Long Island, but it was doing that disastrous, nasty business in their neighborhood, and they formed neighborhood watches, and they ministered to people who needed to be ministered to, but they also drove out the destructive things, and they didn't wait. They didn't wait for City Hall to do it. They didn't wait for the police to have to do it. They took that into their own hands. And in that sense, empowering neighborhoods, empowering educational systems, empowering families, protecting the church to be a moral voice in the middle of all that, That's an incredible way to get back into the city. And you're going to find out that there's forces that don't want you there, because then you're taking away their power to make people dependent on them. Well, I fell in love with urban ministry because the people in the city they were incredible to me, and I wanted to be a servant to them. Our neighborhoods were generally multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilingual. That never mattered to me, because there was always a sense that people are people, and people need what only God can provide. What a beautiful thing to be a useful agent in the name of Christ for the sake of others. So these are some of the issues that you're going to need to learn how to deal with if you're going to get back into the city. But one of the things that we can do is we can start to talk about family. We can start to provide for those kind of classes. We can start to undergird families in our neighborhoods to be known as the family church, to be known as those who care for the foster children, or those kinds of things, to be known as the educational group in the neighborhood for the sake of the neighborhood. Those are the kind of things. And then talk about empowering through our policies. So we support policies that empower neighborhood businesses, that empower individual entrepreneurship, or empower you to own your own home. Those kind of things are very helpful as you reach out, because the neighborhood's finally going to say, why did you fight for all those things? You kept running into the power structure, and they kept telling you, you don't belong here. And the answer was, well, we did it for you, but we did it because Christ he will never stop trying to come all the way to us with his love. And this was a way we felt we could keep coming all the way to you, so that we could say it's because Christ is the one who really loves you, even more than we can ever love you. So again, you want to get to that point where the neighborhood asks, why'd you do all this stuff? And the answer is, we tried to do it for you, and obviously we wanted to be a servant to you, but we wanted you to know the Christ who motivated us to do these things out of love in him for you as well. So today, religious liberty, urban mission, all this chaos that's going on. Do we belong in the middle of this? And the answer is yes, because the world can't take anything from you if you know who you are in Jesus Christ. I'm not saying the world can't make your life miserable. I'm not saying that it can't make it challenging. I do believe that's one of the payments, that's one of the struggles in ministry, is paying that price to keep being that persevering voice of God's truth and God's love in the middle of a neighborhood for the sake of others. But we can do this, but we're going to have to learn how to contend for our liberty to share our faith without fear. So again, today, kind of a special carve out on that, and more of a missional understanding of things. I just wanted to share that with you so that you didn't just get lost in the politics of all this stuff that's going on today. And please realize, if you want to talk more about the missional stuff, there's ways that we can also come. It wouldn't be something from our center, but if there's some of those things that you'd like to talk about in mission and ministry, I'd be happy to try to carve out a Saturday, Sunday where I'm not doing anything else, and maybe we can come talk about that as well. Because the church needs to be a bolder voice right now in the middle of all of these things. So thank you again. Till we see each other face to face, speak the truth in love with humility and grace. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And until next time, God richly bless you. It's been great to be with you. We'll see you next week at our normal time. Okay? Take care. Bye-bye.